burgers and are ready to sit and listen to a great episode of Sports Talk because the NBA free agency has given us a ton to work with this week. It's just been nonstop, big move after another. The four big moves and one notable move so far has been Paul George has gone to the 76ers and signed a 4-year, $212 million deal. He's leaving the Clippers after 5 years there in what could only be considered an abject failure compared to the goals that they set for themselves when they created that team, the expectations they set, but we'll come back to that. Klay Thompson has left the Golden State Warriors after 13 legendary seasons there and has signed with the Dallas Mavericks for a 3-year, $50 million deal. LeBron has re-signed with the Lakers for a 2-year deal worth $104 million, and this very well could be the last contract LeBron James ever signs in his NBA career. James Harden re-signed the Clippers for a 2-year, $70 million deal, which, given Paul George's departure, makes a lot of sense for the Clippers as they try to hang on to the star power they do have on that team. And Paul George leaving probably gave Harden a lot more financial pull as far as what he could demand for a contract than he otherwise would have. And the fifth move that we're going to talk about today is the one that doesn't have any big ramifications, but it is still notable just because of the legendary status of this man, and that is Chris Paul. Chris Paul has signed to go to the San Antonio Spurs. He's 39 years old, and he just signed a 1-year deal, which very well could be the last contract he ever signs in his NBA career. And those are the major NBA free agency moves. Just to knock Chris Paul out of the way, I think him and Victor Wembanyama are a really interesting duo. Obviously, the Spurs are going to be garbage. It's not going to mean anything. Chris Paul is at the point of his career where he's Patrick Ewing on the Mavericks. He's Hakeem Olajuwon on the Raptors. It's just not a good look. Nobody's going to remember the last 3 years of Chris Paul's career. After they lost the championship in 2021, that was pretty much the end of Chris Paul's career as a relevant player. Which is sad, but like I said, he's 39 years old. It happens. And I really think that his biggest value to the Spurs is a veteran presence that could be a great influence on the development of their younger players like Victor Wembanyama. And it'll be cool to see how they work together because Chris Paul, he's not the player he once was, but I can see him and Victor having some nasty pick and rolls together. And it could be, a couple of good highlights come out of that and give him a good little season to wrap up with. And that's about all you can say for it. I would have loved to have seen what would have happened if Chris Paul would have gone to the Spurs 10 years ago. I mean, him and Greg Popovich, they could have done magic together in Chris Paul's prime. And I'm sure Chris Paul will probably make for a good NBA coach after he wraps up, just because of his basketball IQ, the way he sees the game. He's one of those point guards that were so great they could see a couple plays ahead of everybody else. Now, on to the biggest move of free agency, I would say Paul George to the Sixers. This is clearly the Sixers trying to do all that they can to make Joel Embiid happy and give him a big star to play alongside with for the foreseeable future. Because Joel Embiid has been in Philadelphia for 10 years now. Now, it doesn't feel that way because he spent much of the early years of his career injured, and I think he played maybe like 30 games his first 3 seasons. But he's been there for 10 years. He's 30 years old. And with his injury history, a lot of people are amazed he made it to the age of 30 in the NBA, much less that he's still a dominant big man, the dominant big man in the league. And he's not the kind of player that you want to see walk away when it comes time for him to be a free agent. And so to make him happy, you've got to get him in a winning situation. And as competitive as the Sixers have been in the last 5 years or so, they've never made it past the second round of the playoffs. That iconic series against the Raptors where you have the video of Kawhi looking at the ball bouncing around the rim and it jumps like 3 times, 4 times before it goes in. People talk about that like Kawhi hit that shot and the Raptors were in the finals, but there was a quick sweep or a gentleman's sweep at the very least of the Bucks in between that. That was a second round series. So Joel Embiid has never sniffed the conference finals, much less an NBA finals. And that can't be something that sits lightly with him. And it seems like every time he gets put out in the second round, you see the videos, he's crying in the locker room, he's upset, he's angry. And there have been many times, I even believe on this podcast, I've looked at those videos and said, you know what, that'll be great. He'll take that anger, that disappointment, and it'll fuel his fire for next season. But the Sixers haven't really ever been the favorites to come out of the East, and I don't think Paul George changes that. It makes them interesting. It certainly doesn't hurt, but if you're looking for a co-star for Joel Embiid, who very likely will have some serious injury issues in the season. I mean, he had injury issues this season in the playoffs as well. If something happens to Joel Embiid, do you really want Pandemic P to be the one leading your charge into a deep playoff run? Now, Paul George has had some good playoff performances since all that happened, but he's never made an NBA Finals. He's never balled out in a conference finals series. Like, he hasn't done enough, in my book, to rub away the taint of him being a choker in important situations. But on paper, he's another marquee name. He, does put up good numbers, even if it's not when it matters. It'll still be somebody that can help you get through a regular season, maybe. So the rumor around the league is that Paul George wanted to go to the Warriors, but the Clippers refused to trade him there. Draymond Green was on his podcast talking about that. Draymond was annoyed, but to me it makes sense. I mean, it's worse enough if they were to have traded him to somebody in the Western Conference. But to trade them to somebody who's only like an hour down the road, if that, I don't know much about California geography, it just doesn't make sense. If you depart from one of your franchise players, you're not going to want to play him 4 times a season. Send him to the other conference, or better yet, do what Greg Popovich did to Kawhi Leonard and banish him out of the country when he traded him from the Spurs to Toronto. But Dr. J and Sixers ownership came to talk to Paul George, and apparently when they walked in the door, he was wearing an Allen Iverson shirt before they ever said a word to him. So it seems like once the Warriors became clear that they weren't going to be the destination, he went all in on the 76ers. And more power to him. I mean, I hope he looks at it as a challenge. I think even with Paul George, the Sixers are the 3rd best team in the Eastern Conference because the Celtics obviously hold the crown right now. And if the Bucks can be healthy come next year's playoffs, I think they've got to be the favorites over the Sixers. So at best, they're the 3rd best team in the East. And I really don't see this amounting to anything. And for 4 years, Paul George is currently, let me look this up just to make sure I'm not talking out of my tail end. Paul George is 34 years old. So if he stays for the rest of his time in Philadelphia, he'll be 38 by the time his contract is up. This very well could also be the end of Paul George. So far, this free agency has been like the last ride for a lot of the 2010s players. And if PG wraps it up on the Sixers, that wouldn't be too bad for him, I don't think. Now, Klay Thompson to the Mavs. I know I said earlier Paul George is the biggest move in free agency so far. I might already have to backtrack and say Klay Thompson to the Mavs is bigger than that, just because the Mavs were just in the finals and they have a good spot-up shooter now, something that they have lacked and could have really used in this final series. They also have championship pedigree to add on to what Kyrie brings to the table. And if this was 2 years ago, this would have been like nasty. It's still a good move, but if it was Klay pre all those injuries, I guess that's 5 years ago at this point. Like that would have been some wild stuff. Him and Kyrie and Luka together. But Klay going to the Mavericks was a saga in and of itself. He asked Steph Curry and Draymond Green not to intervene on his behalf to try to get the Warriors front office to keep him. And anybody who's followed the NBA has known that Klay Thompson has been very unhappy in Golden State the last year because Draymond Green, he got his big money extension last year. They took care of Draymond, and Klay felt very slighted that they didn't give him the same respect as Steph and Draymond had gotten from the Warriors. Now, Steph, obviously, Klay Thompson is not Steph Curry. So the Warriors prioritizing Steph over everybody is just common sense. He is an all-time great, like top 20 for sure player. A lot of people would argue top 10. I wouldn't, but that's just me. I don't understand why on earth the Warriors would prioritize Draymond Green over Klay Thompson. Draymond Green, since they won their last championship, has caused nothing but headaches. He's been getting ejected constantly. He's been punching teammates in the face. Like, I don't understand what value Draymond has anymore. He was never a great offensive player. At his best in the Warriors, like 2017, 2018 period, like, he was good. He was decent. He's never been an all-star caliber player from an offensive end. His bread and butter has always been defense and the fact that he's the Warriors' spark plug. And his defense hasn't even been that great the last couple of years. He's old at this point. I don't know if his age reflects it, but he just acts like an older player. He's already, like, he's 34 years old, so is Klay. Like, he's not that old, but he's already on ESPN all the time as a commentator. Like, his vibes just give off that of somebody who doesn't have a whole lot of time left in the league. And Klay has always been, to me, the better player, the number 2 on that Warriors team. Draymond's X factor has always been his personality. And I can see the value in keeping him just because he's much more, like, in your face, like, vibrant than Klay. But the Splash Brothers has always been the dynamic duo driving the Warriors, not Steph and Draymond or any of that. So if I were the Warriors, I definitely would have prioritized keeping Klay than Draymond, because what happens if Draymond leaves the Warriors? You know, there is no team where Draymond Green could go to that's not Golden State where he would be relevant. If you send him to the Bucks or the Sixers or the Nuggets, or any other team that could be competitive for a championship, he's nothing but headaches. Klay Thompson to the Mavs, like, he actually has value to other teams. And it's interesting, you know, him on the Mavs. Like, that could be a cool little trio there. But because Klay felt slighted, he decided he wanted to leave. One interesting note about, too, why he felt slighted is throughout the season, as unhappy as he was, his team proposed 4 different contracts to the Warriors to get him to stay. And the team ignored all of them because they wanted to be able to focus on re-signing current players, going out and getting some free agents. And they asked Klay to wait until they made their free agency moves, and then they'd talk about his contract. That right there is a slap in the face to somebody who's helped you win 4 championships in less than 10 years. I don't blame Clay at all for leaving if that's how the Warriors are going to do him after all the hard work and tears and sweat that he's put into that organization. He said that to show Clay respect, Joe Lacob, the Warriors owner, took him golfing in May at a very exclusive Hollywood country club. And the two of them didn't even discuss contracts and Clay's free agency while they were golfing. And that's just so ridiculous to me that you have somebody, and obviously your owner, whatever, your teammates, it's not the same as true family, but a lot of times you make the metaphor of your teammates are your brothers, whatever, this is my family right there. If there's a massive hard discussion that needs to be had and you just kind of invite a family member over and y'all need to really hash out some issues and you just kind of sit and make small talk all day instead of talking about the nitty-gritty, that speaks wonders about the issues in that family. Because if you can't talk about the important stuff, then, I don't know, that's just sad. Joe Lacob, if you're going to invite Klay Thompson out to spend a day together, why not talk to him about why it is that they want him to wait? Why it is that they're not prioritizing him? Have those hard conversations. And if you can't have them, then Klay is in the right for wanting to leave and go somewhere where he's valued. And I think the Mavericks really could use him because I'm just imagining the scenario. And Klay, he's not the offensive player he once was by any means. But he can still put down threes. He averaged 18 points a game last year, 39% from three. So imagine a world where just the passes he can catch from Luka and Kyrie. You've got Kyrie cutting down for a layup, dishes it to Luka, who goes up, but he's a little crowded, so he dishes it out to Klay. Klay nails the corner three. I can see that happening constantly with him on the Mavericks. Now, as crazy as the Mavericks' run was, they were only a 6th seed this year. So the chances of them making another, monumental finals run isn't very high. Maybe it can happen, and I think having Klay gives them a better chance to do so. But the Mavericks wasn't the only team that Klay considered going to. The Lakers really wanted him. They offered him more money and more years than the Mavericks did. But Klay compared playing in Golden State to playing inside of a bubble where it was more about the storylines than the on-the-court drama. And he said going to Los Angeles would have changed one bubble for another. And I do not blame him one bit. With all of the hectic nature of playing the Lakers, playing with LeBron James, look at what's going on right now. All the storylines coming out of LA have nothing to do with basketball. It's all about LeBron behind-the-scene politics. JJ Redick is the head coach. Was he a Nepo hire? Was Bronny James, obviously, you can't even debate whether or not he was a Nepo pick. But, it's all about off-the-court stuff. And I don't blame Klay Thompson at all for not wanting to get involved in that. And that comes from somebody who grew up as a diehard Lakers fan because his dad was a key part of the Showtime Lakers. Michael Thompson helped them win multiple championships. Grew up in LA. His dad still works for the Lakers. So he has all that tie there. But the thought of playing with LeBron in LA was so off-putting. He was like, nah, I'll take less money for less time just to go somewhere else. And they said him and LeBron had a series of deep phone calls where they talked about the possibilities of Klay coming to the Lakers. And he just wasn't interested, and I can't blame him for that. Now, LeBron coming back to the Lakers makes all the sense in the world if you're LeBron from a personal standpoint and from a career standpoint, too. I don't think LeBron will win another championship in his career, unless the Lakers make some gargantuan, like, sign Giannis type free agency move or trade. I just don't see it happening. But at this point, LeBron's more of a celebrity than he is a basketball player. He's got kids in high school that are trying to also become social media influencers, it seems like, because they're always on some sort of TikTok or Instagram live. And his family's set up. He's got the brand deals. He's whining and dining in Hollywood. Like, personal life-wise, from as far as from the outside looking in, LA is definitely the spot LeBron wants to. And if he's trying to add on more to his billions of dollars, business-wise, should be in. From a basketball standpoint, he says he wants to play with his son. And he moved mountains. I can't even say that. I doubt it was that hard for him to sell the Lakers on drafting Bronny. But he threw his weight around, and he got his son drafted by the Lakers. So after that, it was kind of a done deal that he wasn't going anywhere. Because all of the what if LeBron leaves LA fantasy talk this season was based around what if some other team drafts Bronny and LeBron really wants to play with Bronny, so he'll leave the Lakers and go sign with whatever team take Bronny. But that was the only scenario where LeBron left the Lakers. But the Lakers got Bronny, and LeBron is staying. So, that being said, they didn't even make the playoffs this year. They didn't make any good moves in the draft that would greatly increase their chances of making the playoffs in the next 2 years, which no draft pick would have done anyways. But they didn't trade any picks for a good player onto the team. They haven't made any big free agency moves outside of re-signing LeBron. Clay to the Lakers might have done a good job to make them more competitive, and they could have slid in maybe as a 7th or 6th seed at best. But I just don't see it happening. I mean, this is a team that you never know what you're going to get with the Lakers. I mean, 2 years ago, they were in the Western Conference Finals. This year, they weren't in the playoffs. The year before that, they got put out in the first round. They're just all over the place. And I don't see that changing. I don't see LeBron and AD suddenly turning back the clock and being themselves from 2017, 2018. If this was 2017-18 LeBron and AD, then they probably would be a good shots for favorites in the West. But they're not. LeBron is old. AD is injured. Not old, but he's getting there. So, good on LeBron. Wrap it up and see how much longer you can have your victory lap, play with your son, and ride off into the sunset. Now, James Harden with the Clippers, now it looks like him and Kawhi Leonard will be the dynamic duo in the other part of LA. And I'll just say this about the Clippers. In 2019, when Kawhi signed there, they were filming commercials with him talking about how he's the king of LA. He's going to go and take over. This is Clipper country. And this has to be either them or the Brooklyn Nets, the biggest team to set massive expectations and not meet any of it. I don't know. Maybe next time Levi's on, we can have a big debate about who did a worse job of meeting their expectations. But them and the KD, Kyrie, Harden Nuggets failed miserably. And, I mean, Harden on the Clippers, if I were the Clippers, I would have traded Kawhi and tried to keep Paul George instead of letting Paul George go and keeping Kawhi, because Kawhi is like Joel Embiid in a smaller frame. He's injured constantly. I don't see that changing the older he gets. So the benefit he brings to your team is very minimal, because they could have actually made a decent playoff run if Kawhi had been there throughout. But when he came back, he threw off their chemistry, and they got put out, and the rest is history. So, I mean, Harden to the Clippers, it shows you, too, just how little he's valued now as a player, where he only gets a 2-year deal and only for $70 million. Like, James Harden was the epitome of, like, max franchise player a couple of years back, but ever since he's left the Rockets, he's just been a man in decline, and I expect that decline to continue. I mean, he averaged 16 points a game last season. That is unheard of from a man who just 4 years ago was averaging 24 points a game, and the year before that was averaging 34 points a game. So, I don't know. Hopefully, now that Paul George is gone, he'll get a minutes increase and he can put up better numbers. But the days of James Harden being the guy to lead a team to a championship are behind him, and he'd have to be that guy in a team where the guy who's supposed to be in the driver's seat, Kawhi Leonard, is injured most of the time. So that's my thoughts on all the free agency moves to this point. The other big going on in the basketball world is Team USA. The team is reported to training camp today, and they are also reporting that LeBron James will be a starter, which should come as no surprise. I mean, whether or not this 2-year deal LeBron signed is his last contract, this has got to be LeBron's last Olympics. So it makes all the sense in the world to have him be a starter. He's been the face of the NBA for the last however many years now, and you could argue that, but definitely since 2013, so 11 years, he's been the face of the league as they're continuing to grow and grow globally. Put LeBron out there, let him be your brand ambassador. Now, based on the roster of Team USA, if I were Steve Kerr, my starting five would be Steph Curry, Jason Tatum, LeBron, KD, and Joel Embiid. And for those of you saying, wait, isn't Joel Embiid from Cameroon? Good job for knowing the country of Joel's birth. And also, he has his American citizenship just so he can play for Team USA, which has got to be a massive setback for Team Cameroon if such a team exists. And I think the biggest obstacle for Team USA on their path to victory, which I do expect them to eventually get a gold medal, is going to be Team France and Team Germany. I mean, France had like 3 top 10 draft picks this last draft, so they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Germany won the FIBA World Cup, so, I mean, they've definitely got a squad too. But if they can just beat those teams, then they should be good. I mean, the best player on the men's team is Evan Fournier, so at least the most notable. LeBron and Steph and KD, they should not have any issues getting past them. But it's the ultimate test of, what's better, a star power team or a team that actually has chemistry. And a lot of these people have played together. Like, you got Steph and KD on the floor together. In my world, they wouldn't both be starters, but LeBron and AD are both on Team USA. So there is some chemistry to build off of on Team USA. And Steve Kerr is a coach, too, so, the Warriors gang is partially that together. But it'll be fun to watch. And I'm hoping and expecting Team USA comes away with a victory. Now, in other big news, Money in the Bank is tomorrow, which means there's a good chance we see CM Punk show up and cause havoc on Drew McIntyre. Now, here are what the matches are. before I go into what I think is going to happen with CM Punk. But you've got the men's Money in the Bank ladder match. You got Drew McIntyre versus LA Knight versus Jey Uso versus Chad Gable versus Andrade versus Carmelo Hayes. Those last three names you can pretty much disregard. Now, Chad Gable, there's a chance, if you've been watching Raw, the Wyatt family, the Wyatt Six, as they're being called, have been messing with Chad Gable a lot for some reason. So I could see some Wyatt antics knocking Chad Gable out of the match. But Drew McIntyre should, and I would bet is going to win the Money in the Bank. And he has vowed that if he wins the Money in the Bank contract, he will cash in tomorrow night. He said he's not going to wait. He's going to immediately cash in after the Damian Priest-Seth Rollins World Title match. Now, that being said, my predictions for that is that Damian Priest is going to win. They just took the belt off Seth Rollins. They're not going to move it this quickly. Triple H definitely favors longer title reigns, and I don't blame him because it makes the titles mean something when you don't just hotshot it around constantly. I mean, look, Roman Reigns is always super over, but the level of status that he has now after having a 3-year plus championship reign is just levels above where he was before that. So I expect Damian Priest to retain. I expect Drew McIntyre to come out and cash in. And I expect CM Punk to come out and jump him. And Drew McIntyre will win via disqualification, which will not give him the world title. And Punk and McIntyre will brawl all over the building and set up what I can only imagine will be a great no-holds-barred match at SummerSlam. I don't know what they'll call it, street fight, hardcore, no-holds-barred, some sort of weapons match at SummerSlam, and that will be most likely the match of the night. Because this rivalry between CM Punk and Drew McIntyre has just been handled perfectly. Like, this is probably the best story that's not the Bloodline running in WWE right now. And on the note of Bloodline, they had a great segment on Friday where Paul Heyman was just completely destroyed by Solo Sikoa, the Tongans, and Jacob Fatu for refusing to acknowledge Solo Sikoa as his tribal chief. Now, Paul Heyman's acting during that segment was phenomenal. The way it played out, Solo had told Paul Heyman that Jacob Fatu was not going to be there at the start of the show. Bloodline main events the show. The Tongans come out. Paul Heyman, Solo come out. Jacob Fatu's music hits. So you know Solo lied to Paul Heyman. And Solo had told Paul Heyman that the reason they were hitting the ring was they were all going to acknowledge Paul Heyman as Solo Sikoa's wise man. Now, the second Jacob Fatu gets in the ring, they all switch it up. And what they're really there for is to acknowledge Solo Sikoa as the tribal chief. Because, as Solo said last week, Roman Reigns ain't coming back. So the Tongans acknowledge Solo. Jacob Fatu acknowledges Solo. And then they turn to Paul Heyman. And I don't know what they're called, but there's a certain, pretty much like if you go to Hawaii and there's a lei, like a little like necklace of flowers they'll put around you. Now, it's not flowers, but it's like tribal garb. And Paul Heyman is always the one that puts it on Roman Reigns. It's like a part of his identity as the tribal chief. And last we saw, it was around Roman Reigns' neck. But somehow, Solo Sikoa got a hold of the necklace, and he hands it to Paul Heyman. And Paul Heyman is dumbstruck. He's like, where did you get this? Where did you get this? And Solo gives the necklace to Paul, and he says, acknowledge me, put the necklace on me, make me officially the tribal chief. And Paul Heyman, in preparation for this, because he's supposed to look disheveled, distraught, like a man at the end of his rope, he didn't sleep for a day just so he could actually look that disheveled, which I think is a fantastic level and layer of dedication to the storyline. So he actually looks like insanely sleep deprived and about to break into tears. And he holds up the necklace and he looks at Solo, and he looks up at the sky like he's saying a prayer. And he accepts his fate, and he says, Solo, I love you, and I acknowledge that you are not my tribal chief. And when he said not, the place went crazy. I have never seen a pop that big since, for Roman Reigns in a minute. And ever since Cody beat him and he's been off TV, every time there's a Bloodline segment, the people are just chanting, like, we want Roman. We want Roman. And when Paul Heyman stuck by Roman Reigns, that's the loudest Paul Heyman has ever been cheered in his career. I never thought I'd see the day where Paul Heyman turned babyface, but it finally happened. After a 30-year career, Paul Heyman is a good guy for once in his life. And Solo kind of stares in disbelief for a second, and then he just Samoan spikes Paul Heyman. And Paul Heyman sold that spike so great. He's got spit coming out of his mouth. He's acting like he can't breathe. Maybe he couldn't, because I wouldn't be surprised if he told Solo to lay it in on him, make it look as real as possible. They beat down on Paul Heyman. Jacob Fatu gives him a headbutt from the top rope. They put him through the announce table, Shield style, with a triple power bomb. It was just a fantastic segment. Now, where they go from here is the Bloodline is wrestling Cody Rhodes, Randy Orton, and Kevin Owens tomorrow at Money in the Bank. And I don't expect to see Paul Heyman or Roman Reigns on that show, but I do expect that Roman will make a comeback at SummerSlam. The main event for SummerSlam isn't set yet, but they're saying that it's going to be Cody Rhodes versus Solo Sikoa. So I could see some situation where Cody wins, and after the match, Roman and Paul Heyman come out and they beat down Solo, or Roman beats down Solo. I hope that's what happens, because if they have Roman come out during the match and interfere and cost Solo the championship, that just makes Cody look weak, and that is not what they need, because right now Cody Rhodes is the face of WWE. He's the most popular person on the roster. The second Roman Reigns comes back, he's in the number 2 spot again. So they have to do what they can to make Cody strong and believable, and immediately getting undercut by Roman, making it seem like he couldn't have beat Solo without Roman's help, is not the way to go. But because it's going to be Solo versus Cody at SummerSlam, I'm betting on the Bloodline to win. Okay. I say it's Cody, Randy Orton, and Kevin Owens versus the Bloodline. This match is under Freebird rules. So we don't know what combination of the Bloodline will be wrestling, because currently there are 4 members. So it's not going to be a 4-on-3 handicap match. It's going to be either the Tongans and Solo with Jacob Fatu on the outside, or it's going to be the Tongans and Jacob Fatu with Solo on the outside. I think either way, the Bloodline should win, because you don't want to bring in Jacob Fatu and have him lose his first match. Period. That's just not a good look. On the same token, if Solo Sikoa is going to main event SummerSlam next month, you don't want him to lose either. Now, given that Cody Rhodes is on the other team and he's your WWE champion, it's not a great look for him to lose, but it's a tag team match, so he can lose without losing, really. If they have Kevin Owens take the fall, or Randy Orton. So I would have it be a situation where it's the Tongans and Solo, Jacob Fatu's on the outside, and you just have Solo win by pinning Kevin Owens. That way Solo looks strong, Cody doesn't look weak. You could even have a deal where Cody and Jacob Fatu get into it, and they end up brawling, or I don't know, some type of shenanigans that gets Cody Rhodes out of the picture and gives him a reason not to be involved in the finish of the match. So I think that would be a great way for them to play that and really add fuel to the SummerSlam matchup. And the final match of note is Sami Zayn versus Braun Breaker. I think Braun Breaker should win. I don't know if he will, just because Sami just won the title at WrestleMania, and Braun Breaker's pretty new. But, I mean, this guy's the next big thing. I say put the Intercontinental title on him and put the rocket ship on him and let him do his thing and run wild and have an Ultimate Warrior type Intercontinental Championship run. But we'll have to see what happens. I think Sami Zayn will find a way to win, and maybe they'll put the title on Braun in the rematch of SummerSlam. But that's just me. Let me know what you guys think, and we will see y'all next week.